intended to make him one of his subordinates. He smeared some blood on the ground again and drew a magic circle in the center, placing Nickel's body inside. Andreas prepared to summon him. He raised his hands to chest height above him and gathered the turquoise mist again while staring at the skeleton summoning. Then a system window appeared, informing him that a corpse had been found that was also capable of practicing necromancy. Additionally, the system added another effect to the corpse. Andreas was completely surprised by the message and couldn't believe what he had read. In addition to the turquoise mist, a black dark mist now appeared, swirling around the corpse. Nickel floated slightly above the ground while Andreas continued to perform the ceremony. He realized that it took an immense amount of mana to summon a simple skeleton. Slowly, the skin detached from the bones of the corpse until only the bones remained visible. As the last bit of skin dissolved into thin air, the skeleton, completely enveloped in the turquoise mist, stood upright. Andreas, lying exhausted on the ground, watched in astonishment. The system informed him that the skeleton summoning was a success, and that he had summoned a legendary-level skeleton. Additionally, it notified him that his skeleton summoning spell had reached level 3. Andreas couldn't believe that it had worked. Furthermore, the system informed him that the skeleton had a very high level, granting him a series of advantages, such as rank promotion and reclassification as a skeleton soldier. Moreover, it could recall certain things from its previous life. He looked at the skeleton and saw his status window next to it. Based on the status window and the sword mastery attribute, Andreas realized that Nickel had indeed been an aura master in his previous life. Subsequently, the skeleton communicated using sign language. Andreas explained to it that he was now its master and that he would take care of it and be responsible for it. The skeleton understood this, and Andreas felt confident about their future together. Once he returned to his room, he relaxed a bit. He looked at his calendar and knew that it would still take a year for Sharon to die. However, he also knew that there were still several things to be done by then. He opened the system window and checked his status. But first, Andreas wanted to summon his skeleton, so he got up and asked his system to summon the skeleton he had stored in another dimension for so long. It came through a blue portal to Andreas in his dimension. Andreas knew it would be bad if someone found his new friend, so he decided to give him some clothes. First, it was a sunny day outside, and it was peaceful. The skeleton wore a black parka with a hood and a red scarf. Andreas thought it now looked like a real human, no matter how you looked at it. Suddenly the skeleton began training with an imaginary sword. Andreas realized that the Easter egg description had not been a lie. He remembered the description that said Nickel had actually died during training, and wanted to continue training even after his death. Then he smiled, because it wasn't a bad thing for him. He clenched his fist, and had finally found a way to train his character trait. Andreas called out Nickel's name, causing him to pause his training. He asked if Andreas could teach him the art of swordsmanship. Nickel immediately began teaching his new master the art of swordsmanship. He showed him the basics and corrected his posture. However, Andreas was so strained just for maintaining the posture that he was dripping with sweat, and his body trembled from the effort. He was grateful that God had taught him to endure such physical strain. Additionally, he found it crazy that his first mentor was a master of aura, and trained him so rigorously. Nevertheless, he knew that with proper training, he too could use aura in the future. Furthermore, he could switch between mana and aura since he possessed the dual core attribute. He would embark on the path of a magical swordmaster, utilizing not only mana in his heart, but also in his dantian. Unfortunately, it would be a bit more challenging to grow initially, but once he mastered the initial phase, he would be stronger than anyone else, just like the first King Edmund who founded the kingdom. Nickel would pinch Andreas every time he deviated from the prescribed form as a punishment, causing Andreas to scream like a little girl. Andreas asked him what that was about, to which Nickel used sign language to make it clear that he should focus and not get lost in his thoughts. Andreas also asked how Nickel's grip could be so strong, even though it consisted only of a few bones. Nickel attempted to explain, but all that could be heard was the clattering of his teeth. Andreas remembered that he was a member of the Special Forces before entering the game, so he didn't really find the physical training to be that bad. He wanted to show the original Andreas a thing or two about guts. However, the screams he let out when Nickel pinched him again could be heard throughout the entire community building. In the evening, Andreas sat at his desk with a cup of tea and a small tea kettle, wondering how developed his necromancy skill was. Since he had skipped class today to train with Nickel, he opened his status window and found that in the 5 hours that Nickel had been in his dimension and trained with him, he'd gained 2 points. It was faster than he thought. Of course, he knew that it would take much longer to level up the beginner level of his abilities. Additionally, he found it strange that his teacher Sharon hadn't called him in a while. The vampire woman who was still unconscious still appeared normal, so Sharon hadn't discovered that Andreas had further developed her. Andreas realized that it would take a very long time for the development to be complete, and worried that something might go wrong. He looked somewhat annoyed in his room. Nickel was still training diligently there. He wiped off his sweat again and told Nickel that while he knew he had unlimited endurance and didn't feel fatigued, he was overdoing it with his training. He also thought that if he had a potion to help regenerate his endurance, he could train just as much. There were 2 potions that would be useful to him at the moment. One was the healing potion, which heals internal injuries and alleviates fatigue, and the other was the regeneration potion, which heals external wounds and significantly improves the regeneration rate. Unfortunately, there was no way for someone as poor as him to afford these potions. Andreas considered whether he should make the potions himself to keep the costs lower. However, he also knew that the manufacturing process would not be as simple as in the game. Although he knew all the necessary ingredients, he lacked the precise proportions. Determined, he stood up and decided to attend a lecture on potions to expand his knowledge. He made his way to the main building of the academy and opened the door to the lecture hall. Several students were already there, waiting for the teacher. As Andreas entered the classroom, the whispering of the other students about him began. They wondered why he had come to the potions class. Their first assumption was that he had only come to pick up a few girls. As they continued gossiping, Andreas could hear everything. However, he decided to ignore it and endure. He looked around the class and spotted a girl with short, blondish-white hair. She sighed and seemed equally bored with the gossip. Finally, the teacher entered the room and began the class. Professor Vauban taught intermediate herbology at the academy. He stood at the front of the class, speaking about individual ingredients for potions. Andreas listened to the lecture half-heartedly, since he already knew the content from the game. What interested him were the precise measurements for the potions. Bored, he continued to listen and wondered when the teacher would get to the point that interested him. Finally, the time came. The teacher explained that his next topic was a method for brewing a physical reinforcement potion. He repeated himself and explained to the students that the base of this potion was mohin leaves mixed with 3 other ingredients. As the teacher continued speaking and pointing at the board with his stick, Andreas was confused. He didn't know this recipe, and the explanation didn't align with his game experience. He was also surprised that the teacher presented a recipe with so many side effects. In response, he raised his hand and asked the teacher if he could ask a question. The teacher allowed it. Andreas asked why he didn't add 2 more ingredients. This question puzzled the teacher and piqued the interest of the girl who had sighed earlier. The whole class fell silent, and all eyes turned to Andreas. The teacher adjusted his glasses and asked why he should do that. He added that if he were to do that, he wouldn't be brewing a potion, but rather making a soup. The whole class burst into laughter. Andreas was puzzled because the ingredients he listed were the ones needed for a physical reinforcement potion. He was surprised by this reaction from the teacher, while the others laughed. He continued to ponder and concluded that the method he knew to brew a potion with fewer or no side effects had not been discovered yet. After the class ended and he left the room, he thought that his knowledge was much better than what he had learned in that class. He contemplated whether it would be better to learn on his own, and found his idea of attending the class not so wise. He slung his bag over his shoulder and headed to the research department. However, the blondish white-haired girl watched him with interest as he left. When Andreas arrived in the research area, he sat at a table with many scientific devices and liquids. His notes lay in front of him, and there was a large shelf with many books on the wall. He was currently trying to figure out the mixing ratio of the potion he knew from his game time, but the system kept reporting that the potion making failed. Frustrated, he was annoyed by yet another failure, and visibly disappointed. He leaned back and contemplated that even if he knew the recipe, he would need a reliable method to prepare it. He also worried about the cost of the materials, which were much higher than he had anticipated. If he continued to use them for failures, he would soon go bankrupt. Andreas wondered what would happen if someone were to help him, but he concluded that it was impossible for someone to be willing to help someone like him. Suddenly, the door to his room opened a crack, and a small light shone through. The blondish white-haired girl from his class stuck her head through the door. She approached Andreas and said that she had been expecting him to be there. Andreas was shocked because he knew that she was one of the playable characters in the game, and he wondered what she was doing here. She was Lucia Everlast, one of the characters that players could choose to play the game with. Her special talent lay in potion making. Furthermore, Andreas was surprised why she was here. Normally she shouldn't have any close contact with him. Lucia wiped away the charred smoke that lingered in the air due to the failure, and reminded him of his setback. Andreas wanted to ignore her and hope that she would disappear, but she leaned forward slightly and asked him what he was experimenting with. He replied that it was a secret. Andreas was somewhat annoyed. Not only had he attended the class, which had brought him nothing but problems, but now he had even more problems than before due to his presence there. He tried to ignore her and turn back to his experiments, at which point Lucia looked somewhat irritated. However, she didn't give up, and said that he was really bitter. Andreas had only one thought: she should just disappear. Lucia said that she hadn't expected Andreas to make the first move, causing him to turn around curiously. She placed her hand next to him and leaned slightly over his table. Then she asked him if he wouldn't like to study together with her. Confidently, she continued to ask if he didn't think it would be a good idea to learn together. Andreas felt that there was no reason to reject this request, so he asked her what she wanted and what she hoped to achieve from their collaboration. Lucia replied that it was so unusual for her to seek someone to research and learn together. Andreas responded that she would have no benefits from their collaboration. Lucia retorted that she would be very grateful if they could work together. She also explained that she had realized that Andreas had talent and was on the verge of creating something great. She looked forward to developing medicine that didn't exist in their world yet. Andreas silently contemplated. Actually, he wanted to make potions for himself. He knew that Lucia's interest in potions didn't stem from having a certain talent for it, but rather from the fact that she needed to find a way to cure her illness, which could potentially be fatal. Even the most renowned doctors and pharmacists couldn't cure her illness, so she began teaching herself potion making. The disease she had was given to her by the system itself. Andreas also knew that no one else besides him was capable of finding an antidote for her, as he had played the game so intensively. However, he couldn't risk someone as intelligent as her discovering his true identity, as she would immediately kill him. He realized that she suddenly had an interest in him because of the things he had said in class. Andreas continued to ignore her, thinking that he shouldn't anger her recklessly. Therefore, he told her that he wasn't interested in collaboration and asked her to please leave. In response, Lucia mentioned the name of a mushroom. This surprised Andreas, and he made a shocked expression. She explained to him that he hadn't mentioned this mushroom in class, but it was another essential ingredient for the potion he wanted to brew. Andreas was surprised that she knew about the main ingredient. Normally, no one besides him should know about this ingredient. Lucia pointed to a test tube and told him that if he added this mushroom, he would be able to make a potion. Proudly, she said that she knew this intuitively, and that despite his rejection, she was willing to help him. She also mentioned that they could even earn some money if they were successful. However, Andreas declined again, and told her to please leave if she had finished what she came for. He didn't want to risk giving up his life so easily just because of her attractive offer. Lucia then started to leave, but before she exited the room, she told Andreas that she would give him some more time to reconsider her offer. She believed that he would change his mind soon. Andreas watched her annoyed and knew that it wouldn't happen so soon because, even though he wouldn't have to worry about normal collaboration, he found the risk of being exposed too high. After conducting enough research for the time being, he made his way back to his room to continue training. There he trained alongside Nickel and contemplated that he still couldn't solve the problem of the correct mixing ratios on his own. Additionally, he thought during training that another problem was money, and he needed to come up with a way to obtain something to afford the ingredients. He considered whether a good idea would come to him for this problem. Suddenly he startled as Nickel trained with full concentration and executed a downward strike. Andreas knew that Nickel had purposely exaggerated this strike to remind him that a certain focus was necessary during training. So he decided to concentrate more during training and think about his money problems later. He thought about an envelope on his desk and whether there really was no way to earn money. The only idea he had was to ask his older sister for money, from whom the letter came stating that she missed him. However, he realized that this was exactly what the previous Andreas had done. Nevertheless, he didn't know how else to help himself, and even though he didn't approve of this way of getting money, he couldn't find any other option. However, he told himself that this would be the last time he would do it. As Andreas walked across the academy campus, he happened to be recognized by another girl. She was surprised to see him carrying a book and wondered if he had changed and finally made something of himself. However, she concluded that even if he had changed and was finally learning something, it would be impossible for his trashy personality to have changed. And so, she wanted to forget that she had seen him. The girl who thought of him this way was Diane Alvin, the magical prodigy and the youngest girl of the Alvin family. Another character who was normally playable and could easily kill Andreas if she found out he was using dark magic. When Andreas and Diane were younger, they had a very good relationship and often played together. However, after Andreas's family could no longer repay their debts, their good relationship fell apart. He also remembered that the original Andreas had done some unpleasant things back then, which would probably already be enough for her to kill him in a normal conversation. He thought about it, realizing that it wouldn't be unusual for her to kill him, and he recognized that he had already encountered many people who could kill him. However, amidst all his thoughts, he realized that asking his sister for money was truly the only option to quickly become stronger and reduce the danger of being killed, which was currently looming over him. Andreas set off for the capital city of Rodland. Once he arrived in the city, he knew that the place he was looking for must be somewhere ahead of him. It was a large, fancy house, and the lights from the street shining in the night sparkled on the building. Andreas and his sister sat in a small room upstairs, equipped with a window through which they could see the other guests visiting the building. His sister asked him why he hadn't responded to the many letters she had sent him, and if something had happened. Andreas apologized to his sister Amy for making her work despite being a lady of the Count. However, she told him that he didn't need to apologize as he bore no guilt. Full of shame and nervousness, Andreas clutched a small cup. Amy asked him why he had such a peculiar expression and began to giggle. She also asked him if he needed money again. She immediately handed him an envelope, explaining that she had suspected as much and had already prepared some money. He accepted the envelope, and Amy added that he shouldn't spend the money irresponsibly. Andreas thanked her and assured her that he would repay the money. Suddenly his sister's eyes widened, and she asked Andreas where his ring was, which shocked Andreas as well. He lied to his sister, saying that he had taken it off to avoid losing it. Curiously, Amy inquired if he would really take good care of the ring. Andreas couldn't tell her the truth, but Amy asked him, already suspecting that he had given it away if he had actually done so. She trembled all over, and couldn't believe that he had done this particular thing. Andreas knew he couldn't lie, because no matter what he would say, she would recognize that he was lying. She pounded her hands on the table and looked at the dejected Andreas in anger. She said that he wanted to disappear and that she didn't want to see him anymore. She stormed out of the room and also said that he should never come back, and that he didn't need to repay the money either. Andreas jumped up and yelled for her to wait. He would get it back. But his sister ran out of the room and slammed the door behind her. He realized that this ring was truly important to his sister, and that he had never seen her like this before. Amy was still running and crying, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Andreas stood rooted to the spot, wondering about the terrible feeling he was experiencing. He looked down at his hand and wanted to retrieve the ring as soon as possible. He remembered the death of his comrades, and questioned the meaning of life when one only survives. He himself wasn't very happy when he became the sole survivor of his unit. Back then, he was determined to follow through with what he now had and achieve success. That's why he wanted to accept Lucia's offer, swallow his pride and take the risk. A week had passed since Andreas made the decision to accept Lucia's offer. Throughout that entire week, he spent his time refining and perfecting his potion. Lucia eventually urged him to leave his room and engage in some training, so he started running and spent all his time working on the potion and training with her, which was naturally exhausting. Meanwhile, Lucia mostly lounged around lazily. However, when she decided to get up and help, she was a great support, and things progressed much faster. Most of the time, though, she lay on the couch and slept. Andreas called her name, to which she sleepily responded. He asked her why it felt like he was the only one working. She retorted that he was just imagining it. Over time, this made him somewhat angry. Yet even in her half-asleep state, Lucia could give instructions to Andreas and share her expertise. She told him that he needed to change the ratio of ingredients, using a bit less of one thing and a bit more of another. Andreas knew she was right and always followed her instructions. Despite her laziness, her intuition was truly accurate, always pinpointing the problem he had. Thanks to her help, he could usually solve it immediately. As he continued to experiment and mix ingredients, he reflected on their collaboration. Although he worked with her for financial reasons, he found it to be the best decision he could have made. He added some more liquid to his potion, and then took a small sample using a pipette. He dropped a drop of the sample into a test tube, and the liquid inside changed. Andreas was somewhat shocked when suddenly the system window informed him that he had successfully brewed a physical reinforcement potion at the intermediate level. Laughing loudly, he could hardly believe his luck, and jumped up to wake Lucia, who was sleeping again. She asked if he had failed again, and that's why he was so loud. Somewhat incredulous about his success, he looked over at Lucia on the couch and told her that he had done it and successfully created the potion. With that, he temporarily ended his potion experiments. Additionally, the system window showed him that he had unlocked a talent and was able to develop it based on his character traits. He realized that he could probably develop anything as long as he fulfilled the conditions. When Andreas read that he had only reached 32%, he thought of Angela the vampire, so he dismissed the window and decided to let it be for now. Lucia was also thrilled with the finished potion and surprised that it had no side effects and could be taken every day. She wanted to inform the potion examination committee immediately about this potion. Andreas told her that she could handle that part, since he had taken care of all the experimentation. Lucia replied that although she had a lot to do with the midterm exams tomorrow, she wanted to take care of submitting it to the committee since he'd done most of the work up until now. And so, another day came to an end with a beautiful sunset. In the secret chambers of the Dark Magician, Angela lay motionless on the floor, still needing to wait for 14 days, 21 hours, and 33 minutes until her development was complete. In her thoughts she repeatedly called out Andreas's name, wondering what he had done to her, and why her whole body was filled with a burning sensation and pain. However, she knew that there had to be something behind these pains. Shortly after their success with the potion, the midterm exams began, and they took a train to their examination site. Shortly before reaching their final stop, they were supposed to meet on the train to explain to the students what lay ahead for them. Andreas read a book on the train and thought that he shouldn't worry about Lucia because her talent would easily help her pass the midterm exams. After the midterm exams were over, their next step was the Magician Tower to complete the final step of their potion, presenting it to the committee for evaluation. Andreas had also prepared well for the midterm exams and trained his swordsmanship with nickel. He set aside his book and reassured himself that everything would be fine for now. If he passed the exams, he also thought about Angela's development, which should be completed soon, and that he should check on her afterwards. Andreas believed that upon his return he would apologize to Angela and explain that he had developed her, hoping she would understand her situation. However, as he continued to focus on his book and contemplate all the upcoming events, two students were having a conversation on the train. One of them was the genius Diane Alvin, who was asked by her friend what she thought the midterm exams would be about this year. Her friend told her that the task and the groups they would be assigned to were random, and that it would be a piece of cake for her to pass the exams if she was lucky. However, Diane explained to her friend that she didn't care who she ended up in a group with. She would do her best and pass regardless, but her friend whispered to her that it might not be so easy after all, and discreetly looked over at Andreas. In response, Andreas put away his book, and one could see the differences between his initial and current appearance, which astonished Diane and made her gulp nervously. Suddenly an announcement was made that the students should prepare to disembark at their Auckland training station in a minute. The group's teacher instructed all the students to stand up and leave the train as a large building appeared in the background. The teacher explained that, as previously known, this year's midterm exams would be a group work where the members of each group would be randomly selected. He further explained that each group would consist of 3 students from the warrior class and 1 student from the magician class. Additionally, each group would have a supervisor. The teacher stated that each group had until next Monday to complete the assigned task. After his explanation, he wished all the participants good luck and announced the groups. Andreas wasn't thrilled with his group. Besides him and Sharon, his teacher, there were a few other villains at the school, and it so happened that 2 of them were in his group for the exam. She was already mocking him on the train, calling him seagrass, due to his hair, and asking if a mage like him could even lift weights. Andreas immediately retorted, saying he didn't want to hear that from someone who needed beef jerky to appear cool. Ivy replied that she couldn't smoke on the train and had to eat something all the time, jokingly suggesting that she could chew on him instead of beef jerky. Hazar tried to calm down their arguments and mentioned that they would soon arrive at their destination. They headed towards a castle situated on a mountain. Down in the valley of the mountain lay a small village. Their group entered the castle and was amazed by the grand estate owned by Baron Balaric. Baron Balaric was an older man with a beard. He warmly welcomed their group and explained that what had happened was a true tragedy. He was eager to explain the situation to the group. As the sun set outside, he informed them that the landlord of Frim village was his nephew. Although he was also a baron, he had no family. He provided them with all the information he had. Ivy thanked him for sharing all the details with them. Baron Balaric's butler approached him and whispered something in his ear which concerned the baron's son. Andreas overheard the conversation to some extent and looked at them skeptically. He immediately sensed that something wasn't quite right. After this conversation, the baron pondered for a moment and then stood up. He said he had something to attend to, and wished the group good luck with their mission. The butler